Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we getting on? So, today we're going to take a bit more of a full look at Anthem and have a look at the game in a bit more detail. It's been in full release for a little over a week now, and I've had a decent chance to get to grips with it and to have a good look at some of the content. So, for those who don't know, Anthem is the new looter-shooter, sci-fi, Iron Man-esque game from BioWare that has you playing as a freelancer who is a type of mercenary, basically, who's tasked with protecting the people of the world of Bastion from various cataclysms and monsters that live outside their towns and cities that have been created by the world being left in an unfinished state by its creators and the tools they've left behind as well. And yeah, it's damn good fun. So this video is going to take a slightly different tack to my original plan. When I was first researching this video, a lot of the reviews I noticed seem to have a very negative spin, which seems to be something of an issue with reviews and gaming on the whole lately, which I think is probably a bad thing. Although I'm quite pleased to say that the situation isn't quite as bad as I thought it was. On the other hand, there is definitely an issue that I'd like to at least cover during the course of this video. So, a lot of the reviews from Anthem, particularly from some of the larger publications, have taken a first look at it, and they seem to heavily slate the game, which when you actually get into the meat of them is not quite so much the case. They're a little bit more generous than that once you actually get into the reviews. On the other hand, they do tend to front load those reviews with negative comments and sensationalist headlines, that sort of thing, and ultimately I think it creates quite a negative atmosphere around the game. It probably puts off quite a lot of people who might otherwise have bought the game and enjoyed it, so it's something I wanted to address. With reviews like this, it's very easy to take a look and say that it's a problem with the game and that developers need to do better, they need to bug test more before the game comes out, stop putting out unfinished games, and ultimately I don't think that is going to be the result this is going to get at all. Ultimately, I think the end result is going to be that if games don't sell well, publishers will stop publishing them, developers won't be able to get them out, so they'll stop making them, and particularly when it comes to games that are outside of their usual wheelhouse, that sort of thing. Ultimately, we'll wind up with them just trotting out the same old game over and over and over. Which is, of course, not to say that we should completely ignore the shortcomings of games and fail to give feedback or anything like that. But if we're going to write games off over some few small issues, particularly ones that developers are clearly willing to fix, then ultimately we're going to wind up in that dark, dark place where Call of Duty Black Ops 50 lives. So, best avoided, I think. So, looking at Anthem. The game does have its issues. It is well outside of BioWare's usual wheelhouse, so it's not massively surprising that it has got issues. But, in spite of all that, it's great fun, it's engaging, and I'm having a lot of good times playing it. Being a BioWare game, of course, it's got a main story, they're calling it the Critical Path, and it's got plenty of characters for you to interact with. Whilst I haven't completed that yet, I have had a good bit of time to get to grips with it, and the story so far has been pretty fun, pretty engaging, though I did feel it had some untapped potential, shall we say. Core characters giving it a great deal of depth and personality, they're a lot of fun to interact with, it's an interesting, living, breathing world, but at the same time, once you get outside of those core characters, a lot of the more peripheral NPCs are a little less well fleshed out and less well realised, which is something they could have spent a little bit more time improving, I think. So, the game's first tutorial mission serves as a prologue, and it sets the scene for the game as a whole and the story and everything that follows. It takes place 2 years before the main story, or the rest of the story, and you head out to investigate a giant relic left by the Shapers, who are the creators of the world, who aptly disappeared before finishing the job and left all the tools behind. This giant relic, called the Cenotaph, is drawing energy from the Anthem of Creation and has gone critical, creating a cataclysm called the Heart of Rage. So you go out in a squad of 4 freelancers, so it's you and 3 others, and you're alongside 2 other squads undertaking this mission to silence the cataclysm, which ultimately goes horribly wrong. And lives are lost, the cataclysm continues to rage on, tears up the environment, and spawns countless horrible monsters. This is also one of the few very rare occasions in Anthem you actually end up working alongside NPC characters, and they actually accompany you on a mission. Although, as with all the other occasions that I've encountered so far anyway, they don't actually have a major impact on the gameplay. It's mostly down to the player to achieve the objectives and crack on. It's also one of the few purely single-player missions, actually, if not the only one. So you fast forward 2 years, and the freelancers have lost all their reputation. They are scattered, and many of them have hung up their armour, and the few that are left are trying to eke out an existence by taking on various contracts. They're now viewed less as sort of heroes and defenders of the people, and more as sort of untrustworthy, unreliable outcasts. So the story then picks up with your efforts to rebuild your personal reputation and the reputation of the freelancers in general, taking on contracts and heading out on missions for people in order to pay the bills as much as anything. You're focused around Fort Tarsis, which is your home, and you're heading out doing these missions, and as the story develops, of course, it all sets up with a larger picture and bigger series of events going on behind the scenes that lead towards the big second attempt to silence the Heart of Rage. So it's a fun story. There's a lot going on. It's deeply personal to the player character, which is great. And the characters are, as I say, very engaging and bring you back into the story more and more. Unfortunately, it has a few shortcomings. Namely that despite all of its fun, its great concept and very engaging nature, it kind of skips forward a little too fast. It pushes through a little too quickly, and gives away most of its big revelations and big story beats a little too quickly. So, as I said earlier, it builds towards the second attempt to silence the Heart of Rage, and introduces characters and reintroduces old characters that you've now got history with. But the motivation to set out on the big main events is mostly delivered through a few cutscenes by more or less a single character or a couple of little characters. And it's a little short, in my opinion. There's a lot of potential in it to build mystery, to build an investigation where you're looking to find out more about what's going on, get clues and see what's going on with the world and find out more about what's happening behind the main story. But it kind of bypasses that by telling you, this has happened, go do this about it. Which, it's not to say it doesn't work or it's bad, but there's untapped potential there that could have been a lot better, in my opinion. So, on the gameplay front, Anthem's pretty solid. It's a little bit limited in some ways. It's led to, well, coupled with the story, it's led to kind of accusations of the game being somewhat unfinished at launch, which I'm going to touch on a bit more in detail in the later part of the review. But on the whole, gameplay's pretty darn solid, I think. The combat's fun, it's responsive, the various weapons mostly feel different and unique. Though saying that, there are some similarities. Some weapons feel more unique than others, but they do have distinct heft and punch. They sound good, they feel good, they respond well, so it's always good in a heavily shooter-based game. Each javelin functions as a different class, and you unlock them as you progress through the main story at various levels, and you can choose whichever order you want to unlock them in. Though the tutorial's always played with a ranger, you can unlock whichever javelin you like first, and from then on you'll progress with that javelin until the next unlock point, and so on and so on. So, aside from the visuals, you can customize the way you equip the javelin, the gear you have, the weapons you have, the type of abilities well, up to a point the type of abilities you have. Each javelin obviously has its class-based style, and then within that you can specify how you want to approach that. It's cool, it gives you a lot of options, and then allows you to build a character whichever way you want to. But yeah, it gives you a lot of customization and a lot of ability to do your own thing with it. Beyond that though, combat tends to boil down somewhat to targeting enemies' weak points and building combos to do maximum damage, whilst obviously avoiding your own damage, so it can be a little simplistic. Unfortunately, this is not really explained in the tutorial. It introduces you well to the start of the game, the story, and the general style of it, but in terms of a good number of key mechanics, it's not introduced very well at all. That being said, on the other hand, though that's not ideal, things like weak points, if you hit those, the damage indicators come up yellow rather than white, so it's immediately obvious. And with combos, you get a big, well, you get the word combo flashing up on screen, so you can see that you've achieved combo. So it can be worked out without that. I suppose there's a bit of a side point, which doesn't really fix the problem, but is an interesting one anyway. That it helps build a larger community around it, people talking to each other about the game and how best to get the most out of it, stuff like that, which is not a bad thing, even if it's not really ideal to the problem at hand. As you push on with the game and get to higher levels or focus more on multiplayer, then combat becomes considerably more strategic, considerably more nuanced. Attacks being more coordinated for greater effects, and you can also use certain abilities on your teammates to clear things like status effects. So if your teammate's on fire, hit him with something with ice, and he will be put out. And obviously at higher levels, your gear gets more and more complex, and you can build more and more complex character builds, so that works pretty well. Although, if you want to play it single player, or have to, if you're in my situation, then it does kind of reduce some of the opportunities for complexity a little bit, which is a bit unfortunate, but kind of inevitable, I suppose. So the flight controls have been significantly improved since the initial demos. It's particularly noticeable on PC if you're using a mouse and keyboard. It was somewhat unresponsive initially in the demo, and now it's much more responsive. It's got a lot more customizability. You can tune things whatever way you want, and it feels absolutely great, to be honest. A sensation of flying around the world, getting from place to place, is definitely one of the things Anthem gets very right. Great fun. The swimming side of things is basically flying underwater, but it does feel different. It's much heavier and slower, which is kind of the way you'd expect it. It can be a little annoying. The contrast is a little too stark at times, but suddenly you've gone from flying through the air to flying through water, so, you know, it kind of would feel different. Personally, I think if they kept the speed reduction in place and then made the controls a little bit more sensitive, which you can probably do yourself if you want through the menus, but I would think it should probably be included in the game, that would keep the difference in terrains, for want of a better word, the difference of environments, feeling quite unique, but at the same time would take some of that irritation away from it, the inconvenience of it. So Anthem introduces a lot of its world building in much the same way BioWare has done with previous games, in the sense it has cortex entries, they're called in Anthem. It might be codexes in other games, which essentially fills out the player's personal encyclopedia and lives in the same sort of place as your journal does for mission entries, things like that. Which is fine, but kind of a double-edged sword in some senses. It allows them to give a lot of detail and a reasonably well fleshed out world, but at the same time it requires a lot of reading. That can kind of interrupt the flow of things, but at the same time you can also ignore that and just push on to the combat if you want. On the other hand, if you are skipping past it, you won't miss too much, but you will miss quite a bit of context and lore and background, so you might wonder why you're here and who are these people that are being referred to. So it's a difficult balance to strike, I think. For me, I don't mind sitting there reading it. I want to know more about the world I'm exploring, so that's fine by me, but in a multiplayer game, not necessarily ideal. And the other problem, of course, it has is that you pick up most of these cortex entries in various places around either Fort Tarsus or when you head out into the larger game world. And you can quite easily miss them, or I'm not entirely sure if you pick things up in the wrong order or not, or if it figures that out for you. But it does mean, particularly if you miss things, you can be wondering a little bit, like, what the history of a location is, or you'll find one, and things just seem to be missing sometimes. So it has its shortcomings, this system. Despite saying that, of course, it is still quite a complex and in-depth world, which is always welcome for me, particularly from BioWare. So speaking of the world as a whole, it's a reasonably good size, both in missions and in free play, which basically involves flying around unrestricted on the map and running into random localized events, world events. And you take a little while to get where you're going, so it's got a good size to it. And of course, with the world being so vertical as well, it's that much bigger. You can fly quite high, to be fair, some very high up areas, some low down. Find you're looking for a mission, it might be much higher up than you expected. And also you find that you can dive into caves and flooded underwater areas as well, which also expands the size of the world. And there's a few instanced areas as well, which is quite cool to go and explore, sort of dungeon-style areas. The game holds more than enough to keep players busy, at least in the short term, which will give BioWare plenty of time to work on their new content and keep releasing more, which, by the way, they intend to do for free, which is always welcome. So in terms of the gameplay and the story, we've got a fun, engaging game that is visually absolutely stunning, but it does have a few issues. So, as I said, the mission and the story and all the that sort of content are delivered through interactions with other characters, NPCs. It's something BioWare have done for years and do very, very well. However, it all takes place in the single-player hub, which is your home settlement, Fort Tarsis. It does create a slight issue that you have to return there between each mission. Can kind of break the flow. It's not too much of a problem when you're playing as a single player. When you're playing in multiplayer, particularly as a group, if you've got voice chat going on in the background, it kind of interrupts the flow a little bit, which is not ideal. And obviously if you've got voice chat going on in the background and you're trying to listen to what NPCs have to say to you as well, you could find that you miss things and it's hard to keep up with sort of two conversations at once. Since launch, BioWare have added the new Launch Bay area, which is a social area attached to Fort Tarsis. You can have multiple players in the same instance and you can interact. For the late game, this is quite good because you can pick up the late game content like contracts and missions like that from that area. But for the main story, you're still in the core of Fort Tarsis, so it does break you up a little bit more. On the other hand, the game's heavy focus on multiplayer does somewhat detract from it as a single-player experience, which is in some ways deliberate and in a lot of ways, at least in my opinion, kind of unfortunate. So Anthem's got 6 difficulty levels. You've got easy, normal and hard, and then once you hit maximum level, which is level 30, you can unlock Grandmaster difficulties, which is in levels Grandmaster 1, 2 and 3. However, if you're playing as a solo, you're going to find anything over normal extremely difficult, and possibly even impossible if you're looking at the harder Grandmaster difficulties. It is kind of unfortunate, really, because your best chance of getting those legendary drops, the best gear, certainly getting them quicker, is through the higher difficulty levels, like the Grandmaster levels. The other side of it, of course, is strongholds, which are like specific dungeons that you can rerun over and over, are group focused, and they're also the best area to get loot again. So high difficulty keeps you out of it in the main game, it means it takes longer to get your loot, and the most rewarding area for loot runs, the strongholds, you can't do at all if you're solo. You have to either find some friends or bite the bullet and use the public matchmaking system, or just struggle on without doing them, which is, I think, a little disappointing. I know they're trying to emphasize multiplayer, which is fine, but the facilities are in place, the mechanics, everything they need to have a stronger single-player emphasis, which will give more freedom to the player, allow you to do whatever you like. If you want to jump into the game, maybe you are playing with a squad, but your squad mates aren't available for whatever reason, it wouldn't keep you out of the game that way, but as it stands, it kind of does, particularly in late game. In terms of other late game content, they haven't been released yet, but BioWare will be adding cataclysms into the game, which they've described as like large raid type content. They're calling it aspirational content, which the gist of it is they occur in free play and they're big world-changing events, and they will run for an extended period of time and take a while to complete. Reading between the lines, and based on my experience of some things they have put into free play so far, I don't think they'll actively lock people out playing single player on that. However, I suspect it will be extremely difficult to do solo. If possible, then it will probably take a very long time and require a lot of patience and skill to get through. So it's something to bear in mind. We'll have to see when they actually release the Cataclysms, but that would be my guess for now. So the one other thing that is a personal issue with me, that I'm sure many people won't think is an issue at all, is that the end game is heavily focused on loot. The goal at the end is to get the best loot, get yourself geared up the best you can, to build your javelins with loadouts and setups that give you the best range of options, the best gear possible. To me, that's not really the ideal for endgame content. I'd rather have endgame focus more around story, but that's just personal preference. That being said, however, one of the big advantages to the games as a service model that BioWare have gone for with Anthem is that they've got the systems in place to add all sorts of new content, some of it group focused, some of it single player focused, some of it event based, some of it story based, and they've heavily implied that there will be a mix of all of these things coming in the future, so there should be plenty for everybody to look forward to if they can make good on that. Hopefully they will. So, overall, my personal feeling on the game is that it's fun and engaging and absolutely stunning, and as it stands, up until you hit max level and finish the main story, it's probably best to experience single player actually. And you avoid the interruptions in groups, and you don't miss out on the story from having your squad mates talking whilst you're trying to follow along with the story. And then once you progress past that point and engage with the endgame content, it's probably better approached in a group. There's a bit of an unfortunate contrast and a very stark one, but that's the way the game's currently set up. I think on the whole, the staggered launch that BioWare went for, or probably more EA to be fair, probably did the game more harm than good. It would have been better treated as a full early access rather than sort of just getting into the full game early. As it kind of put a bit of a negative spin on the fact that it launched for those who had paid extra to get in early, and it then wasn't in the best of conditions. That said, following the day one patch and the patches they've put out since, the game is in a much, much better state than it was. It very, very quickly addressed a lot of the issues that were there for the first week or so, I think it was. So the game now is looking absolutely great. So if BioWare can make good on their plans to put a variety of content in the game as well, it should be great fun for a lot of people. The game's intended to be multiplayer focused, and it makes it very clear, to be fair. It tells you when you're trying to play single player frequently that the game is better played in a group. I think it would, as I say, benefit significantly from embracing the single player a bit more and giving players way more choice and way more options. And I think it's something they could do quite easily, so hopefully they'll get enough feedback to that end that they'll actually consider doing it in the future, despite the fact it's not the original plan. I would guess that Anthem's going to be the sort of game that I'll enjoy for a few months, and then I'll probably put it down, and then when they release new content, I'll jump in, we'll see what it is, we'll have a look at it, see if I enjoy that. If I do, play through that, and probably repeat that cycle, hopefully for quite a good long while. We'll see how it actually pans out. Saying that, I think it should be a good game to continually have on the back burner and keep coming back to. On the other hand, if they release these content updates quickly, more in the vein of something like Warframe, for example, who do it every few weeks or so, put significant patches out, then it could be a much more constantly played game. So, okay, it's got a lot of potential, I think. I definitely would like to see the game realise. So, for the last point before I sign off, there's a couple of things that from various reviews that I'd like to touch on and sort of address. So one of the big issues I've talked about is that between games you have to return to Fort Tarsis, specifically in a loadout point of view. If you want to change your weapons and your gears, you can't do it... Gears? Your gear. You can't do it mid-mission. You've got to leave the mission, go back to Fort Tarsis and do it there. Which a lot of people have said they don't like. Personally, it's not an opinion I share. I think it's absolutely fine doing that. You might be wearing an exosuit, but you don't want to be carrying around a lorry load of guns in your back pocket. That just doesn't make any sense. The game has quite a lot of emphasis on planning and building your javelin and customizing and all that stuff, and doing that mid-mission also doesn't make any sense, and it would detract from that experience, I think. So I don't think I have a problem at all with the going back to re-kit yourself. It fits with the game to me. A lot of people have commented on the bugs the game had at launch. As I say, most of the patches that have been released so far have been pretty damn solid, and the game is in a much smoother state than it was a couple of weeks ago when it first became available to those who got the early access. Would have been nice for those who paid a bit extra to do that, if they could have experienced it in an ideal condition, but that's should we say, a publishing decision that could have been done a little better, I think. Still, at that stage, it is doing well. The condition the game is in now, there's only really one major bug I've run into I've played about 30 hours or so of it, I think. And that's that certain events in World Play don't progress properly and you can't complete them. So one bug's not really bad going on a game of this scope, and I'd imagine they'll be making a priority of fixing that sort of thing. So I think we're doing okay really on that front. The bugs aren't as bad as they have been made out to be, I think. Game's UI has been something that's been a bit of a sore point for people, and yeah, that could definitely do with a bit of work. It's not very intuitive, it's a little hefty. Finding what you're looking for can be a bit of a pain at times, but for those of us on keyboard and mouse as well, it's obviously been designed for use with a controller, which I think BioWare, to be fair, have acknowledged. So some improvements there would be nice as well, but it's certainly not game ruining by any stretch of the imagination, so not the end of the world. So, two final points that have been really big issues for people. Firstly, the loading screens. Yeah, there are quite a lot, and they are quite long. That's been improved by the patches, but still not ideal. Saying that, though, take a look at the game, have a look at some of the footage I've just shown you. It's phenomenally detailed, it's absolutely gorgeous, and you add the verticality into the world as well, it's really quite large. That detail and that stunning look persists right through every element of the game, so you've got to pay for that somewhere, and that's loading screens. It's not ideal, but I think I'd rather sit there and wait for 30 seconds while the game loads up than, you know, sit there and play a bland, flat-looking game. That's just my personal feeling on it. People have been saying that they're experiencing really long load times. I haven't been, but I'm playing it on a decent PC. If consoles might not have it as good, I don't know. I can't really comment one way or the other on that, but I think waiting a little while for a game that looks absolutely fantastic is not really too high a price to pay, personally. And the last thing I wanted to touch on was that the suggestion that the game has been launched unfinished seems to be a suggestion that's going around quite a lot at the moment. We're talking about a standard model of game, something like, say, Resident Evil I played recently, or Tomb Raider back before that. You've got the game, then you've got DLC building on that, adding a bit more content. Then launching that in an unfinished state would be a reasonable complaint. Very reasonable, to be fair. On the other hand, when you're talking about games like Anthem, that are games that use the games as a service model, I think it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. The whole point is that the game is a starting point at launch, not a finishing point. The idea is to take that feedback, find out what players like, find out what they don't, take the ideas, draw on everything the whole community puts forward, and create something that is that much bigger and better and will persist for much longer. In that regard, assuming that it's unfinished and that's a bad thing, well, it's like I say, it's meant to be unfinished. That's the point. You can't develop that much on something that's a hard finished product. So that said, yeah, a little bit of polish never goes amiss, but I think it's kind of missing the point, that particular complaint. So, before I get into too much of a rant on my sort of thing, I'm going to wrap up and say, yes, I'm very much enjoying Anthem. I think it works okay as a single player. I'll have to look into it a bit more, see how the end game goes, but I think that's where the game is going to let down the single player somewhat. That's kind of always been its intention, but for me, I think they're missing a trick there. I think they're losing out on an opportunity to appeal to even more people. Alongside that, it's got a lot of potential, and I think it is going to grow into that and become something even better in future, and I'm looking forward to playing more of it. To which end, I hope you found this useful and informative. If you did, do hit those buttons for me. Social media links, as always, down below, so do keep up with me on there. You should be seeing plenty of screenshots over on Instagram as well. And for now, I'm going to wrap this up and jump back into the game, I think, and have some more fun. So thank you very much for watching, and I will be speaking to you all very, very soon.